bring in our 1320 49ers insider, Chris Biderman. Chris, what's happening, my man?
Man, I like the sound of that. It's good to be with you guys. How's it going?
Welcome home, buddy. Welcome home. Of course,
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man, that's where you should be.
Of course, he's with the Sacramento Bee and co-host of Candlestick Chronicles as well. Probably not the week you expected. Certainly cut day on Tuesday was big, but arguably Jimmy Garoppolo, through all of the cuts across the 32 teams, the football news was dominated by the 49ers backup quarterback.
Yeah, it was definitely surprising. And, I think, I didn't really see it coming at all. And I think Kyle Shanahan didn't see it coming really. And once Jimmy Garoppolo made it clear that he was willing to take such a dramatic pay cut to come back and he surveyed the landscape, like I understand why it works for both sides. And I think Jimmy Garoppolo was smart to do it because, we saw what happened this last year to Mitch Trubisky, right? All he did was just back up Josh Allen in Buffalo and he rehabbed his image. And now he's, a starting quarterback for a pretty good team in the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't know if they're a playoff team, but they've certainly gone to the playoffs with worse quarterbacks than Mitch Trubisky. And now Jimmy Garoppolo is potentially in the same boat. And he doesn't have to go anywhere else. He can stay, he can be in a familiar offense, familiar surroundings. And if anybody knows how to utilize Jimmy Garoppolo, if he had to be put into action, it's Kyle Shanahan. So it's really a win for both sides. My initial thought was like, man, this is awkward. But after thinking about it and talking to some people, it's like, it's just a pragmatic move by the 49ers. I know there's going to be a lot of discussion about it in the same way that there was a lot of discussion about the quarterback situation last year. But, despite all of that discussion last year, they still went to the NFC title game, right? Mm-hmm. And Jimmy Garoppolo wasn't great, wasn't terrible, was playing hurt, obviously, throughout the playoffs. But I think it's going to benefit both sides. And honestly, my take is like, I'm not expecting there to be a whole lot of quarterback drama, or at least as much as a lot of people are expecting, given what happened.
Yeah, Chris, I've said for the record, I don't think I'm going out on the limb saying this either. I'm saying Jimmy Garoppolo will not play this year due to performance, due to Trey's poor performance. That's not happening. If Trey gets hurt or whatever the case may be, obviously he'll come in then. But I don't think it'll be a situation where Jimmy is put in because Trey is just not performing. That doesn't even mean that Trey is going to play great. I'm not even saying that. I'm just saying I don't think that Kyle Shanahan is going to give Trey the hook really at any point this season.
Yeah, and I think like one of the things that people aren't really talking about is just what the offense is going to look like with Trey Lance, because what we saw during training camp and the preseason was a very elementary version of Kyle Shanahan's offense, right? There wasn't the Deebo Samuel rushing attack, zone read stuff. There wasn't any Trey Lance using his legs. There wasn't really any designer plays or game planning or play sequencing, which what Kyle Shanahan's really good at. Like he'll run 4 different plays out of the same look and then mix in personnel. And he wasn't doing any of that. And, I think it's going to look very different than what happened with RG3 back in 2012. But I kind of think conceptually it's going to be the same in that defenses aren't really going to know what to prepare for early on, right? I think there's an element of unknown every time you change quarterbacks, which was true for the 49ers when they switched from Alex Smith to Colin Kaepernick in 2012, right? Like part of the reason that was so successful is because nobody knew how to defend the zone read in the way the 49ers are running it. And I'm not saying that I think it's going to be a lot of zone read for Trey Lance, but I think Kyle Shanahan has a lot of stuff in his back pocket that he hasn't put on film yet that's going to catch a lot of defensive coordinators by surprise. And yeah, like the 49ers also have maybe one of the 3 or 4 best group of skill position players in the league. There are certainly questions about the offensive line, but they have an all-pro at tight end. They have an all-pro at receiver. They have a first-round pick in Brandon Ayuk, who a lot of people think is going to take a significant jump. They have Kyle Juszczyk, who is a super valuable player for them, and his versatility is one of the reasons why the offense is able to be so versatile. So I think Trey Lance ultimately is going to be put in a lot of positions to succeed solely based on scheme and the surroundings, or the surrounding talent that he's going to have. And it's not going to be like Trey Lance and shotgun with 5 wide receivers throwing 50 times a game. They're going to run the ball a lot. I would expect Trey Lance to probably pass 20 to 25 times a game early on. And even if he isn't as efficient in the short and intermediate passes like Jimmy Garoppolo was, there are going to be more big plays. And I think the 49ers will probably be a better third down team because Trey Lance will be able to make more plays outside the structure of the offense. So I think there's just a lot of different ways the 49ers offense can improve now from what it had with Jimmy Garoppolo as a starting quarterback, because Jimmy Garoppolo was pretty limited.
Could Kyle have to game plan more or scheme more for that offensive line you were speaking of just a minute ago, more than he does for Trey Lance?
Yeah, I think so. And I do think that's a legitimate concern, right? Because if you look at one of the reasons the 49ers have been successful with Kyle Shanahan, particularly in 2019 and last season, they won the line of scrimmage a lot on both sides of the ball. And you lose Alex Mack and Laken Tomlinson, like those are 2 Pro Bowlers. And now you're replacing them with Aaron Banks, who certainly is not somebody who's inspiring confidence to this point, and Jake Brendel, who the hope is like, well, maybe he's an okay player. And yeah, they like Spencer Burford. And there's also, Daniel Brunskill, who's, I would say, a league average interior offensive lineman. And he hasn't really practiced or played in preseason games because of a hamstring injury. And so, yeah, I think Kyle Shanahan's going to have to do a lot of things to move the pocket, right? To give Trey some boot actions, a lot of misdirection, play action stuff, in order to negate that pressure. Because, if it's 3rd and 12 and some of these interior defensive linemen that the 49ers are going to have to go against are just pinning their ears back, I don't love that situation for them. So it's going to be about executing and playing situational football, in the sense that like they cannot afford to get behind the sticks, because I don't know how much confidence they should have in really any of their offensive linemen aside from Trent Williams. And that's probably the Achilles heel of the whole team, frankly. Like I think if there's one thing aside from injuries that can derail whatever hopes the 49ers have to contend this year, I think it's the offensive line. And they think that there's enough talent there to get out of those guys, but I also know that not everyone in the building has been super impressed. And I think that was, by the offensive line. And I think that's pretty clear by the fact that, Eric Branch of the San Francisco Chronicle reported that the 49ers were looking around for offensive line help, and they claimed somebody from the Browns earlier this week. So we'll see how it all shakes out, but I do think that's a legitimate concern, and Kyle Shanahan is going to have to get creative when it comes to dealing with that.
That may be the worst place in football to have your Achilles heel. It's on the offensive line. Like, it feels like you can make up for everything else, but if the offensive line isn't there, you can't run, you can't pass, all this other stuff. Chris, how did we get here with the offensive line? We were talking about as soon as the season ended, hey, they need to bolster the secondary, which they did, but they also need to look at the offensive line. I mean, Damian talk about a number of different times on here. It seems like they completely ignored that. Not only did they ignore it, they lost 2 starters on there. How did we get to the point where they're scrambling around the waiver wire for offensive linemen?
It's weird, right? Because they do this with different position groups, or they've done this with different position groups pretty much all throughout Kyle Shanahan's tenure. It's been, in 2018, it was, well, they really need a pass rusher. And if you go back in that draft, they didn't get any pass rushers. And like Cassius Marsh was like their best edge guy, right? And then Kyle Shanahan at the time said it's tough to beat out Cassius Marsh. Well, what do they do the next offseason? They get D Ford and Nick Bosa. And then obviously that reshapes their entire defense. In 2020, the roster was pretty much set. In 2021, they really needed cornerbacks. Like we said it throughout the entire offseason, and they went into the year with Jason Verrett, who has a huge, lengthy injury history. He ends up tearing his ACL in week 1. Josh Norman has to play a lot. That's a disaster. Drake Kirkpatrick has to play a lot. That's a disaster. And it's starting to feel like, for whatever reason, they just go into off seasons and just kind of neglect certain positions. And this year it's the interior of the offensive line. And they were hoping Alex Mack would come back. but he ended up retiring. I never thought that they were going to give Laken Tomlinson a competitive offer, and obviously that was made apparent too by drafting Aaron Banks in the second round. They like Daniel Brunskill a lot. I tend to think Brunskill is probably a 6th or 7th offensive lineman, somebody who can play multiple spots, who is versatile, and that's his value, not necessarily as a starter. And like, this is a team that goes against Aaron Donald twice a year. So it was a little surprising, but I will say, like, in 2019, when they went down to play the Rams, I think it was October that year, they didn't have Joe Staley or Mike McGlinchey, who were both out. And it seemed to be really problematic, right? And there was a game against the Browns that they had around that time too, a Monday night game, where Justin School was playing left tackle going up against Myles Garrett. And not to say that Justin School was like a superstar in that game, but Kyle Shanahan did well to get the ball out of the quarterback's hands quickly through play design. And that's probably something that they're going to have to do with the offensive line again. But yeah, it is problematic because, you look at the Super Bowl against the Chiefs. It was Chris Jones being really problematic in the fourth quarter against Mike Person in that offensive line. It was in the NFC Championship game in February. It was Aaron Donald wreaking havoc along the interior in that game as well in the fourth quarter. So you can point to situations where, the 49ers offensive line has survived the regular season and some in the playoffs to a certain extent, but in the biggest moments of those seasons, it's been the interior of the offensive line that's been a big question mark. And they didn't really do a lot to fortify that spot this offseason, aside from infuse some new young guys. And maybe they'll be good down the line, but for now, it looks like it's a legitimate question mark.
Chris, one thing Kenny and I were talking about, we were actually just going over the schedule a few minutes ago, is I'm of the belief if the offensive line is going to disintegrate a little bit, disintegrate later, like give Trey Lance 4, 5, 6 weeks. If you could give Trey Lance 4 weeks to figure out the timing of being an NFL quarterback and you're going to fall apart then, okay, give him time to like figure it out. My biggest fear for this offensive line would be if they come out week 1, week 2, where you're playing a couple of teams that you don't expect to be really good and they're bad there, and Trey never has a chance to find his footing in the backfield. Yeah.
I mean, I ultimately think if they get push off the line of scrimmage in the running game, then that will set everything else up. Right. And that was, I try not to read too much into anything that happens in the preseason. And I think year after year, we're just lied to. Fans and just media people, we're all just lied to by what happens in the preseason. And even anyway, I don't want to get into that whole discussion, but like one thing that did worry me was week 3 against the Texans, even when the starting offensive line was out there, albeit without Mike McGlinchey and Trent Williams, the 3 interior guys who are probably going to be starting, they were getting dominated by the Houston Texans. Right. And I know it was like a short week and they had practiced in Minnesota and it was a 3rd preseason game and nobody really cares, but like, those guys need good experience. Those guys need good reps. They need to put that on tape. They need to build confidence and chemistry with each other. And they were getting pushed back. And it's going to be really hard for the 49ers to be as successful as they want to be on offense if they aren't going to run the ball well. So I really think the key for the offensive line, first and foremost, is to get push in the running game. Because if you get push in the running game and the running game successful, you're not playing behind the sticks. You can run play action. You can run all those bootleg stuff, those bootleg plays that Kyle Shanahan likes, and you can make all of that stuff work. But the foundation of the offense is the running game. That has to be there. And so that to me is probably what I'm most concerned about when it comes to the offensive line, because I do think if they run the ball successfully, Kyle Shanahan can do enough schematically with play action and misdirection and all of those things to sort of slow down the pass rush a little bit, but it's not going to work if they can't get pushed off in the running game.
Run everything to the left. Okay.
Yeah. Like line Kyle
all to the left.
Yeah. I formation. Kyle Juszczyk goes left. George Kittle goes left. Trent Williams is left. Like that's just, yeah, I'm with you on that.
Don't worry about the right side of the line. Just run everything to the left to establish yourself. Yeah. One of the things that kind of shocked me a little bit, it wasn't a major shock, but I took notice was Jermichael Hasty's getting cut. And I say that because I felt like he was the best receiving option out of the backfield. And I thought he did pretty well in blitz pickups when he was in there. And like I said, not a starter, but I thought he was able to do things that I don't think anybody else in that running back room has shown they can do to this date. One of the things that got to my mind, though, was do you think that they're going to have Debo in the backfield a little bit more now? And now, as opposed to last year, when every time he went in the backfield, it was a run to Debo. He wasn't doing nothing else. Now, do you think maybe Kyle incorporated him coming out of the backfield as a pass catcher and bringing that dynamic into the way they use Debo as well?
I think that's certainly a possibility. I know, the 49ers would love to take as many hits off of Debo as they can, right? Like they still want to utilize him and maximize him, but also not run him into the ground physically. I think the answer here, though, is Elijah Mitchell evolving his game to the point where he can be more of a third down guy. Because that's one thing that surprised me a little bit last year was Elijah Mitchell, when he was healthy, was kind of limited to first and second down. And maybe it was a product of him dealing with so many injuries last year because, he was dealing with a concussion at one point. He had a knee injury early. I think he had a hamstring. He needed knee surgery in the offseason, and he didn't really do anything during the offseason program. Even in training camp, he didn't work a whole lot. But I think Elijah Mitchell is more than capable of being a really valuable weapon to them in the passing game and could be that guy on third down. And I think if, with Jeff Wilson Jr. there and Jordan Mason and Ty Davis Price, like those guys could also take some of the first and second down load away from Elijah Mitchell. And I think Mitchell is probably the most athletic of their running backs that they have. Like he to me seems like a really good candidate to be a weapon on third down for them. So we saw flashes of it. Like he had a few catches last year and a few big plays in the passing game, but I personally would like to see Kyle Shanahan utilize Elijah Mitchell more on third down. And to me, by letting Hasty go, I think that's sort of a signal in that direction. And to your point, like, yeah, maybe it is Debo Samuel. Like he's getting paid lots of money. Like maybe the 49ers are like, well, why don't we get our money's worth here and have one of our best guys in a featured spot on third down? I think that does make a lot of sense, but you also want to make sure that you have Debo Samuel healthy if you're going to make a playoff run in January.
Chris, what are your expectations for this season for this team?
Man, I feel like I'm more optimistic than a lot of people. Like I mentioned,
Yeah, probably not Kenny.
I think, the NFC to me doesn't have a clear-cut juggernaut favorite, right? Like we say you can look at the Packers and yeah, they've won 13 games and however many seasons in a row, and they have Aaron Rodgers, but it's a team that the 49ers have beat twice in the playoffs in the last 3 years. Tampa Bay has a loaded roster and Tom Brady coming back, but he is just
You don't want to play football no more.
Yeah, he's taking 10 days away in the middle of training camp. Their offensive line is dealing with a lot of injuries. I think that's problematic. I think the 49ers are in a really good position to make a run here because I look at last season and it felt like they were winning all those games really despite their quarterback play. And if they get Trey Lance to just make a few more plays deep downfield, a few less costly, interceptions, if the offense can be really creative and Kyle Shanahan can find ways to get guys the balls in their hands in space, like, if Brandon Ayuk takes a leap, I think Brandon Ayuk is poised to have a big season. And honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if he had more receiving yards than even Debo Samuel this year. Like if Brandon Ayuk was the team's leading receiver, that wouldn't shock me at all. Not to say that I think Debo Samuel's not going to have a good season, but like there are only so many yards to go around, right? So I think it really, like, this is a team that's going to get carried by its defense. Like the 49ers might have the best defense in the league, and Nick Bosa might be, a defensive player of the year candidate this year. And Fred Warner, if he bounces back from his rough first half of the season that he had last year, and Charvarius Ward is an upgrade that they think he's going to be, like, this defense could be close to what it was in 2019. It obviously you don't have DeForest Buckner and we'll see what they get on the opposite edge from Nick Bosa, whether it's Drake Jackson coming in, whether Samson Ebukam takes another step. But I do think the defensive line is deeper than it was in 2019, maybe not as talented at the top because you did have DeForest Buckner back then. But to me, their defense is so good, and they're just the skill guys they have on offense and Kyle Shanahan pulling the strings. To me, it's a formula that says like they should be competing for one of the top spots in the NFC. And if the Rams take a step back and Matthew Stafford's elbow is a real problem, and we know the 49ers have beaten the Rams a lot in the regular season the last few years, I expect the 49ers to be in the mix to contend in the NFC. Does that mean, the AFC's loaded? Like going against Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson or any of these other star QBs in the AFC obviously would be tough. But if there's a silver lining in that, it's, they get to play the AFC West in the regular season. And, they have a lot of big games. They're going to have a lot of really big games during the regular season, and they're going to be battle tested in a way that allows them to figure out how good they are and what they need to shore up and what they need to work on. And so playing against, they have Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, Russell Wilson again, Derek Carr and the Raiders and Devontae Adams. Like, they have a lot of really high profile games against a lot of elite opponents, and it's going to be a very good test for them. And we're going to know throughout the regular season exactly how good this team is. So I think that if they stay healthy, they're going to be as good as anybody in the NFC. And if they stack up some wins against these AFC teams and these AFC West teams that they play during the regular season, then, that'll give them some confidence going into the playoffs. And as we know, anything can really happen once they get there.
They can go, Chris. They can go. I'm telling y'all that right now.
I'm with you.
I'm not saying exactly what's going to happen. I'm just telling you they can go.
Yeah.
All the haters at the filthy McNasty.
Stop it. Relax. We'll get your pressure points. Pressure points.
They got me charged up.
I know. You've been fired up all week. You've been fired up since the Jimmy Garoppolo news broke. You've been on one. Chris, great to have you. Thanks for being with us today. Looking forward to a long and hopefully very, very, very successful season for the 49ers together.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be working with you guys and really appreciate you guys.